Hello, good evening again. I would like to welcome each and every one of you to the last session of the day, which is titled Naga Voices on Memories, Healing and Decolonization. To save time, I think I'll just call out our presenters one by one. And as I introduce the presenters, I invite each one of you to come up to the stage, okay? So our first presenter is Manngai Phom. He teaches at Yingli College, Longling. He's also a researcher at RAD and also at the Faculty of Language and Literature, Cotton University. He is interested in Northeast Indian studies, memory and war studies, and his presentation will be on memorializing history, storytelling as collective archive. So fun fact, Manngai is also a trained vocalist and songwriter, and he is composing the theme song for RAD, which will be out by the end of the year. So what I'm trying to say is, Moram Bram, we can like YouTube channel to follow there. Okay, our second presenter is Dr. Amihe, who is a Manchester United fan. He's from Mututsuku village, am I getting that right? Has a PhD from Hyderabad University and is currently a trainer of teachers, is into music, photography, and digital media. His research interests include Naga literature and history, modern graphic novels, poetry, and post-colonialism. So in his presentation, he will tackle the conundrum of the Naga identity and trace the roots of the constructed identity. Our third presenter, Dr. Loina Shohe, has a PhD in Sociology of Religion from the Department of Sociology, Nagaland University. She currently teaches at Unity College, Dimapur, and her publications is in journals as well as books. She has also reviewed manuscripts for Taylor and Francis. She has engaged with the local news media as a writer, commentator, and discussant on social realities and history pertaining to Naga society. Her research interest lies in religion, culture, indigenous studies, gender, and decolonial studies, and her presentation today is on decolonizing Naga history, rereading Hutton's monographs on the Nagas. Our last presenter, Bauna Panmei, he teaches history at Patkai Christian College, and he works primarily based on Northeast India in general and the Naga Hills in particular. His research interests include the history of colonialism and Christian mission, history of education, interaction of print culture in Northeast India, borderland studies, and history of science. His paper, titled Colonial Entanglements, Flows and Circuits of Writing in the Naga Hills, will explore the connections between colonial exploration, circulation, and flow of information in the 19th century. I welcome all of you to this session. So just a heads up, this session, each presenter will get 10 minutes, and after all of you are done, we'll have a Q&A round. So I want you all to be prepared with questions for our speakers. Okay, so to start with, I'm going to invite Manngai Phom to present on memorializing history, storytelling as a collective archive.
Well, a very good afternoon, everyone. I have titled my presentation as Memorializing History, Storytelling as Collective Archives. So to begin with, we see that storytelling has been instrumental for indigenous people to vocalize, preserve their stories, and advocate for themselves. It involves memory sharing, knowledge passing, and cultural shaping. For an oral community, stories serve as archives grounded within the larger socio-cultural consciousness. It is a collective way of identifying the past through memory. In recent decades, Naga literature has actively found space to incorporate stories. Looking at memory, we see that memory was not a category of study until the 1980s, observed by Kervin Lee Klein. He is a historiographer. It was always considered lesser to history, It is because history was to be rationalized, and even and also especially during the modern period, history was used as a sancto stricto, a discipline that is to be disenchanted from other forms of fictional additives. So, but we could see that memory has always been existent in mainstream disciplines like anthropology, literature, psychology, or even social sciences. While in literature, sometimes, despite modernization, rationalization, and disenchantment as their methods, there seems to be an inquiry into the past, using private and cultural memory as key terms to understand man and art's condition. That is, fiction becoming a little fact-based. Julius Kleiner, in his work, The Role of Memory in the Reception of Literary Works and Structure, inspired by Ingarden's theory, locates memory as an integral element of the presented world, precisely because it is built to remind things remembered and not observed. It could be spotted in the brisk career of autobiographical and testimonial literature, in the development of new forms of museum exhibitions and discussions over the new formulas of archivism or debates over the politics of memory. When I think we are all fond of the French historian Pierre Nora. So he writes that memory or inquiry of memory became necessary as modernism, or the sacralization of history, swept away a plethora of tradition, vistas, occupation, customs, and lifestyle. That's from his book, The Time of Memory. So another reason would be the radicalization of history, which includes the multi-directional decolonization of minority memories. It is connected to three types of decolonization. First is the worldly decolonization, that is having a broader worldview of what decolonization is. The second is internal decolonization, that is understanding self. It might pertain to sexual, social, religious, and even regional minorities. And the third, and the most vital one that we will be discussing, is ideological decolonization. So built in the rubble of the 20th century totalitarian, communist, and Nazi regime, ideological decolonization helped minorities or of the freed nation to meet with the long-term traditional memories which were confiscated, destroyed, or manipulated by the regime, or that is the colonial regime. So the only escape in the later part of historiography or even literature is the intermixing of fiction and fact. Linda Hutchin, in her book, The Poetics of Postmodernism, History, Theory, Fiction, examines the concern of postmodern thoughts and brings forth her findings to engage in reading historical fiction which culminates a postmodern shift of new historiography intersecting historiography and fiction. She named the genre historiographic metafiction. We also read Umberto Eco's book, The Name of the Rose, where he says, and I quote, "Books always speaks of other books, and every story tells a story that has already been told." This view only ends up in a kind of textual idealism because all texts are seen as perpetually referring to other ones. Similarly, memory sharings are interrelated. One story is a smaller collective consciousness remembrance of the larger. Okay. We see one of the most important factor when it comes to memory, or the mnemonics of memory, is of the space, especially in the context of Nagaland. And I'd like to read a few. Spaces and memories are symbolic expressions of communities, as memories are specific to people and their homes. And the place as societies living wholly under the sign of history could not, any more than could a traditional society, conceive such sites of anchoring its memory. Well, this is a quote from Nora. Pierre Nora. Naga writings reflect individuals' recollection of the time of war by bringing together shared memories of the larger sense of community's memory, which history glaringly falls short in representing. Sites of memory are antithetical to history, as there exists the presence of social and communal sentiments. unlike history, which correlates with certain events and are generally established upon certain records. Outsiders have recorded Naga history for a long time, since the colonial regime. Only in recent years have Naga started to write about themselves. For example, war narratives or historical novels. For example, if I have to mention few as Kire's work like Mari, Bitter Wormwood, A Respectable Woman, or even Tamsila Au's These Heels Called Home, Lebanon from Ahead, or even Viopu's writing Waiting for the Dust to Settle. Other non-fiction includes the recent publication, A Naga Odyssey by our very own Dr. Visya, and Once Upon a Life of Burnt Curry and Bloody Rags by our late Tamsila Au. While writers like Dolly Kikan writes Leaving with the Land, Ceasefire City, Leaving with Oil and Coal, Seeds and Foreign Food Sovereignty, Eastern Himalayan Experience, these writings give voices to people to say something about themselves and their everyday challenges and experiences. These moves were made keeping in mind to own one's own narratives. While most of the writing comes from the collective memory of a community, such as lived experience, anecdotes, testimonies, and collective remembering, it can be said that it adds to the unfinished project of simple historiography. Memory plays a pivotal role in this process. Collective remembering also refers to cultural ways of remembering, both for social and autobiographical remembering, cultural memories. In a Naga context, a shift of crops, diet, lifestyle, religion, etc., or even in terms of religion, that is the gospel. It becomes an activity that shapes the process of remembering. In indigenous societies, like the Naga context, certain reference like places of memory, like the Kohima War Cemetery, the cathedral, the village, and other monumental sites, even enclaves, memorial sites becomes reference to compare past events like the prehistory, pre- and post-war scenarios. Other than simple writing, digitalization has elevated the effort in preserving and storing memory. For example, alongside governmental initiatives to archive oral narratives, individual efforts like the Take One Project, Nagaland, it's a YouTube channel wherein all repositories, it's a privately owned YouTube channel wherein most of the stories are well documented on war memories or other forms of oral memories have been stored. I myself have extensively referred to it and have used it. Research initiatives like RAT documents interviews and perspective of the present generation, so apart from researching and collecting anecdotes. Well, these inquiries at present leads us to think about what and who we are at present. We exist in the liminality, trying to live in the present in oblivion with an unresolved past. This suggests us to truth-telling, unbiased memory sharing, which leads to healing and recovery. Retrieval of the past should also mean retrieval of the unheard and unresolved. Thank you.
Thank you, Manngai. I now invite Dr. Amihe to present on Naga identity, the exonium conundrum, tracing the roots of a constructed identity.
Thank you, Dr. Lula. Good afternoon to all of you. It is actually a little unnerving to be standing here sharing the podium with people whose names I've heard. Dr. Sanyo, for example, Dr. Kekon, and so many of my talented colleagues over here who are sharing, the panelists over here who are sharing the stage with me. I wonder if I can do justice to this opportunity that I've been given. I also ended up writing a 5,000 word paper, but then, you know, as having been a student myself, I realized that having to listen to someone who's going to say 5,000 words is not fun. So I will try and give you the gist of what I've written over here. Today's conversations have mostly been about, you know, memories, repatriation, colonization, and decolonization, right? And so all of these are conversations that center around identity and belonging. Now, let me ask a question. How many of you say that you're Naga? Can I see a show of hands? How many are Naga over here? If you're Naga, raise your hands. Right. Thank you. So plenty of us. In fact, if I'm not wrong, almost all of us. But then you ask yourself the question, what makes you a Naga? Is it the food we eat? Is it the things that we do? Right? The way we look? Our culture? Our history? So all of these are circumstances that have accidentally happened to us. For example, my birth is an accident of circumstance. I didn't choose to be born where I was born, to whom I was born to, right? But that made me Sumi. And I am Sumi because I was born to Sumi parents. I am Sumi because I eat ahone, for example. I am Sumi because I speak the Sumi language. I'm also Sumi because I identify with it. So it's a personal choice that I make, but then I also culturally connect it to my identity. But it's a very complex set of questions that you have to ask yourself and try to answer when you think about identity. And in the context of a society like Nagas, the Nagas, who have, for the most part, we have not had a very peaceful history, right? We have had colonization, then we've had the Indo-Naga conflict. So we've had a lot of disassociative experiences over the years, which have separated us from having a smooth, progressive, organic growth in our understanding of our culture, of our heritage, of our history. So what I try to understand today is to take a look at how the genesis of our identity can be understood. Colonization is something that has happened to the Nagas. That is a historical fact that cannot be changed. We understand it. But then what came with colonization was that there were a number of factors that led to massive changes in the Naga society and the way we understand the world around us. So these changes made the Nagas see the world from a different lens. And I also believe that the Naga identity, the term Naga, this is an exonym. An exonym is a little different from ahone, but an exonym is a word which is, a term given to a group of people by an outsider. For example, I look at someone and I say, this is that person, right? An endonym, on the other hand, is something that you internalize. So if you have chosen to identify yourself as something or someone, that is an endonym. The term Naga is an exonym because this was something that was used to identify the Nagas as being separate from, say, the Ahom people, the Manipuri people, from the Britishers. So understanding the roots of our identity is a very important aspect in understanding who we are. Because when we understand our history and when we understand our own culture, then we begin to move towards appreciating our own culture. We begin to move towards understanding our own identity. There are two major factors that went into shaping or affected the formation of a Naga identity, which I have argued before, like that it was constructed. So it was not an organic creation, but it was given to us, and we have now appropriated it. So British administration or colonial policies is one, and Christianity or the American Baptist mission work is another. Now, I am taking a risk when I say that Christianity has done a lot of changes to Naga society because we are in a church, but I will go ahead anyway. The colonial experience can be broken up into three different periods. So the first period we had the military excursions into the Naga territories. Now, when this happened, they didn't come, peacefully. So they came trying to control or subdue the Nagas who were causing problems to the surrounding regions. So there was a lot of conflict, and they also looked at us from a very militaristic point of view. So our description during this time was that we were savages, we were brutes, we were evil, we were, barbaric. So all of these things were used to describe us. Like we were half naked, of course. That is a given fact. But so all of these were nomenclatures or descriptions of the Naga people. And then this was followed by a period where the Nagas, the Britishers, they followed a policy of non-intervention. So in the 115 years, you had three periods. The second period was a period of non-intervention. During this time, the Nagas were left alone. So the descriptions or the way the Naga people were talked about remained unchanged. So anybody who wanted to know what the Nagas were or who the Nagas were, they would refer to the documents that were written about them, and that identity continued to be perpetuated. Right. So it was only in the third stage where you had the American Baptist Mission coming in, and where you had the British administration trying to administer the Naga areas, that there was a sort of connection that was happening between the Nagas and the colonizers, where actual communication took place. But by then, the identity had already been established, and Nagas were beginning to, at some point, look at themselves from inferior lenses. So those factors went into the way the Naga people viewed themselves, and to a large part, this was ethnographic in the way the Nagas were described. Now, what is happening in the past few years is we have a lot of literature that's coming out from Nagaland, where people are writing about Nagas, how we view ourselves, right? For example, we have Eastern Kiri's work, which has been alluded to already, and we have Temsila Au's works. We also have a lot of many different writers who are taking pride in our own cultural heritage. So there is a different stance on the way we're looking at ourselves. So this sort of self-affirmation that is happening in our narrative, this is something that can be considered a healing, that can be considered a growth towards something more positive. So this is only possible because we have an understanding of where we come from and where we need to go towards. Christianity, for example, may have made massive changes in the way we practice our culture, our religion, our beliefs, superstitions, our war dances, for example, the clothes we wear. So there are so many associated factors that went into the way the Nagas began living after experiencing Christianity. And it's not because our ancient practices were evil, although an argument can be made in that case, but it's also because all of these cultural practices were intrinsically tied to our way of life. So when we adopted Christianity, all of these things had to be separated. The Morong was, sort of demonized because it was seen as the place where all of the cultural artifacts of our Naga people were being, transmitted from one generation to the next. And this was replaced by schools, educational institutions, which aimed to homogenize us. We were told that English is the better language. I am speaking English, but this is also because of our inherent issue of language barriers. So, English, which served as a crutch for us to communicate amongst ourselves, eventually became the crutch on which we depended so much that our own mother tongues, our languages, our dialects are dying out. So these are factors that we have to think about when we, think about identity. Finally, and the issue of identity or the question of belonging is a complicated conversation that we need to have with ourselves, that we need to reflect on, sometimes ask each other what it means to be who you are. And when we have conversations that are taking place like what we are having today, this is a wonderful opportunity. I see so many bright, young, intelligent minds that have been asking questions, that are willing to learn, that are curious to understand what it means to be a Naga. And this is an opportunity that I never had when I was growing up as a student, but I'm so glad that we can be a part of this and facilitate communication and conversations about this. So to close, I know I have jumped around a lot, but then it is quite simply not possible for me to share everything that I've written about. So the fact that we have such a rich tapestry of history of our traditional systems and values that need to be reassessed and re-evaluated for their worth in our lives. Because a people without culture, a people without history, they lose their way. And that is why these conversations that we're having right now is so important. Without a cultural identity and a sense of belonging, the social responsibility that people feel towards their villages, for example. When you're not connected, when you don't have that sense of connection with your homeland, that identity will die out. And that is the crux of where we are right now. Right now, the Nagas are at a point where we have to decide, we have to take a conscious decision on where we need to move forward with this. And having a deeper understanding of our history will equip us with the knowledge the knowledge to embrace the mistakes and the wrongs of the past. For example, when we talk about repatriation, right? And recognize how and where we need to work on in order to move towards a more positive future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Amihe. We had a deadline of November 30th and a word limit of 2,500 words for our presenters. So imagine my surprise when I received a 5,000 word complete paper at 3 a.m. this morning from Amihe. Let's move on to our next presenter, Dr. Loina Shohe. She has a PhD in Sociology of Religion from the Department of Sociology, Nagaland. She teaches at Unity College, and her publications in journal and books, and she has also reviewed manuscripts for Taylor and Francis. So she's going to present on Decolonizing Naga history, rereading Hutton's monographs on the Nagas.
Thank you, Nula, for the introduction. The title of my presentation is Decolonizing Naga History, Rereading Hutton's Monographs on the Nagas. The facilitator has just put in. I would like to start with a brief introduction on how the enterprise of knowledge production, when it comes to Naga context, still reflects our colonial past, although the colonial powers has been withdrawn since the 1940s. When it comes to production of knowledge, especially related to European colonialism, we will see that it was a strategy which the colonial administrators used to dominate and control the narratives of the native people wherever colonialism took place, not only in Naga context, but in other parts of the world as well. Now, I am going to argue in this paper, in this presentation, that the colonial knowledge is biased and it was only done in the interest of the colonial powers by focusing on the two monographs written by J.H. Hutton, the Sema Nagas and the Angami Nagas, with some notes on neighboring tribes. Through this, I would like to focus that although the colonial powers have been withdrawn, what we call as the process of decolonization in the political context has taken place. When it comes to the intellectual context, decolonization process in the Naga context has not happened. So I would like to focus on the fact that if we want to go for complete withdrawal of colonial powers, it should not be confined only to the political domain, but it should translate into decolonization of identity, our history and our culture as well. Very briefly, I would like to refer to some sociological theories regarding knowledge. So Berger and Luckman has says that knowledge is something which is accepted by the society as real. Kelp, another sociologist, has opined that knowledge is produced in a hegemonic structure, and he has further elaborated that it is the elites in the society who has the power to produce knowledge. In other words, we can conclude that if the elites are biased, then there is the possibility of producing biased forms of knowledge. Despite the various discourses on colonialism with regard to the domains and the context, one general view which has been established, which is inarguable, is that colonialism was not confined only to the political domain, but it extended to the literary, to the cultural and intellectual domain as well. During the colonial period, we will see that colonizers engage in collecting information about the natives in order to have a better idea about them and also in order to ensure their administration over them. Now, in the 1950s, colonialism was recognized as morally disagreeable, and there was a call to put an end to it urgently. So by 1950, we will see the decline of colonialism. And hence, decolonization, the withdrawal of political subjugation or the political power of the colonial power started taking place. Decolonization also became a term which was associated with how the erstwhile colonized societies began to challenge and try to decenter the colonial hegemony of colonial writings and colonial knowledge. However, scholars of decolonial studies have also identified another concept which is called neocolonialism, which is said to be a new form of colonialism, where they have argued that scholars like Bouchard, Sharma, Das in Indian context, in African context, they have argued that in the post-colonial, the native scholars and the native elites are perpetuating the hegemony of colonial structure by continuing with the colonial structure and identity. Also, scholars are not reproducing new knowledge, but simply reproducing the colonial writings, and the inability to engage with colonial writings critically has resulted in this idea of what we call as the colonized minds. In Naga context, we will see that there are scholars like Tong who has been critical of it, especially in context of the terminology of headhunter or headhunting. Then we also come across scholars like Tini who has agreed with Tong with regard to headhunter and its concept. He has also agreed that historically Nagas have never identified with it. But then later we will see in his work that he becomes accommodative of it and says that it has become a part of an identity which cannot be separated from us. Another scholar, Kanato Chopi, has referred to colonial writings as something which he has no concern for. So we have indigenous scholars who are critical, categories of indigenous scholars who are critical, who are accommodative, and some who just does not seem to have any concern for it. On the other hand, Das, an Indian scholar, commenting on Naga anthropology in the post-colonial, he has said that outsiders who are continuing to write about Nagas still refer to the colonial writings, and they are just producing the Naga image as barbaric, primitive, savages, and so on. On the other hand, Wouters and Haynes, another two non-Nagas academicians, on their comment about colonial writings in Naga context, they are of the opinion in their books, the Nagas in the 21st century, they are of the opinion that Nagas in colonial context and present context are so different that there is no point for contemporary Nagas to engage with colonial writings. On the other hand, I would like to join the debate in this part and then say that in my own experience during my PhD fieldworks and for my other research papers, I've come across that, like Mem Dole Kikon has also mentioned in her Morang lecture on repatriation and decolonization, that elders refer to colonial monographs to share our history with us. We also see that, especially in my capacity as a researcher, an indigenous scholar and researcher, when I read Naga literature or when I attend seminars, I come across a lot of writings which are producing with references to the monographs by colonial writings, and the few works which have been criticized by Naga scholars have not been addressed at all. Whether they agree with it or not, it's always good to do a literature review, but they just simply bypass the Naga scholars' work and then refer to the colonial writings only. This is the reason why we will see that, and not only that, we will see that there are lots of books which are being written and other related, how we glorify Hatan and so on. I feel like the question of how the state government is involved in perpetuating this colonial images, that's also an area that we should discuss and research also, but today I don't want to elaborate on that. The point here is that we are still continuing with how the colonial powers or writers have projected us or represented us. So in this context, I thought that we will spend a little time in understanding how Hutton has depicted us or represented us in his two monographs, as mentioned earlier. When it comes to engaging with historical texts, Rutri and Muti has noted that texts are never objective, but it is always influenced by personal cultural biases of the writer or the critic. Keeping this in mind, I would like to now take us to Hutton's text. Also, before we go further, I want us to keep in mind the paradigm of Hutton's privileged position as a colonial administrator, who was also a Western anthropologist and influenced by Western science and deductions of his time. We will also keep in mind his upbringing as a Christian and a citizen of a European nation. So in this discussion, although Hutton has mentioned concepts primitive, savages, barbaric, enemies, since these have already been criticized by some already, although they are often bypassed, I would not repeat this. Rather, I would like us to go through some lines which have not been addressed by others. So for instance, in the Sema Nagas, Hutton has said that among the women, ugliness is the rule. When it comes to Angami ladies also, he has said that except in one or two villages, they are seldom really pretty and very quickly lose whatever looks they have. Further, he uses the terms like plain feature and stumpy figures to describe the Angami ladies. Chopi, commenting on the Sumi women, he has remarked that it's a very chauvinistic remark, but I would argue that this is a very demeaning and very disrespectful and disregarding of the women. And we also have to understand that aesthetic value is relevant to individuals, to society, to culture. On the other hand, writing about someone's physical appearance in an official document very openly reflects complete disregard and disrespect for the other person. When it comes to the intellectual capacity, Hutton has remarked about the Sumis as the psychic experience of the Semas different little on the whole from those of more cultural societies, whereas of the Angamis, he said, his cranial capacity is less than that of the average European. In both these instances, we see how the prism of viewing the Nagas are taken by comparing it to Europeans. Firstly, in terms of inferior culture and in terms of intelligence, both this reflects Hutton's racist attitude. Then in Sema Nagas, he said, all of course go in single line when referring to a marriage ceremony and march to the usual accompaniment of meaningless chants and loud cries. Of course, coming from a different culture and language, we can understand that he may not understand completely the value of what was taking place, but the tone of his voice is very condescending in these lines, as we can see. And cultural practices vary from society to society, but here also we see that he tends to look at the Naga's culture as meaningless, something which has no value simply because he does not understand it. So here also we are seeing that it's a clear indication of his cultural biasness. Again, referring to the wet cultivation of the Angamis, he said that because of the wet cultivation, the Angami man is prone to doing nothing but drink zu. And he said, if at home, then drink mudu and gossip. I've been to Konoma in Jakamana, and those of us who have been will agree their terrace cultivation. We are in complete awe of it when we come across this. These terrace cultivations are not natural in the sense that they are man-made. It is the Angami people only who have made it. And we can see that it has withstood time. So we can imagine how much hard work they put into constructing it and sustaining it. But here we see that Hutton does not look at the positive side. Instead of remarking about the ingenuity of the Angami's farming method, he prefers to take it as a factor for causing them to be lazy, which I find is very subjective. He's not being objective in the sense that he's focusing only on the negativity of it. Then, remarking on the religious beliefs and practices, he has said in the Angami Nagas again, so vague is his idea of the deities and spiritual beings that he makes no attempt to reproduce in carving or in picture the mental image. Then he also goes on to say that the worship an Angami village renders to its deities, if worship it can be called. Religion differs, beliefs and practices differs from religion to religion. We cannot expect one religious beliefs and practices to be mirrored exactly in another, but that does not mean that we can judge that one is religiously or spiritually inferior. But Hutton has clearly mentioned his religious biasness is visible here, and he has also mentioned the last line reflects that he is unable to conceive that the Nagas can even have the idea of a religion. And when it comes to social science studies, religion is again closely connected to the intellectual capacity also. So I am arguing that all these concepts of savage, pagans, headhunters, what was those that he used? Barbaric, all these are actually connected to this because they are talking about the same person. We cannot expect Hutton to refer to us headhunters in a positive way when he is going behind insulting us and, to be very truthful, betraying us. So I am concluding that Hutton's image of the Nagas is constructed through a very demeaning, condescending, biased, subjective prism. And for him, we lacked in appearance, in intellect, in labor, in character, in spirituality as well compared to the Europeans. The reason why he has, okay, this part let me just leave out. Let me just come to the conclusion quickly, maybe I have to kill more time. So Hutton's writing, when we look at it, we will see that it was informed by indigenous informers or whom we call as interpreters. So, whom he has acknowledged in his book also, possibly to give his work that more scientific outlook. Nevertheless, because of the indigenous formers' role in providing the information, perhaps completely disregarding the books may not be the best solution. However, it is important that if text, not only Hutton's, but any colonial works, if it is referred, we should do in such a way that it will not devalue our identity or our history or our culture. In other words, we should try to view it through our indigenous framework. And our claim of identity, our history, our culture should be one which positively represents us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Loina Shohe. I now give time to our last presenter of this session, Bauna Panmei, who's going to present on colonial entanglements, flows and circuits of writing in the Naga Hills.
They say that if you have too many papers, then you're not ready. Thank you. I want to thank the organizers for giving me this time. What I'm going to do today is actually an exercise. I cannot claim that I have a paper, but I think this this platform has given me an opportunity to sort of look at some issues. I was quite confused till last night because I wanted to, my focus was somewhere else on another sort of, I wanted to look at how human remains were circulated back to Europe, but again, when I was reading through the materials, I felt that it was a bit dark, and somehow I shifted to writings. Sorry. So today, what I'm going to do today is I'll be looking at, so my paper is titled Colonial Entanglements, Flows and Circuits of Writing in the Naga Hills. When we look at the writings of colonial history in the Naga context, with the writing of Andrew West, writing the Nagas, things have really opened up interrogating colonial sources and also historicizing the different materials that have been produced since the 19th century. So like one of the former speakers mentioned that the colonial, Andrew West had demarcated, sort of categorized the colonial Naga anthropology into 3 sections. We have military reports and administrative, and later on in the beginning of the 20th century we have the colonial monographs, which are referred to by many of the historians, anthropologists and social scientists. The first part, I just want to look at sort of a brief, I want to outline the recent studies on Northeast in general and the Nagas. So what I'm doing is the first part, I'm discussing a bit on the recent writings on Northeast and Nagas, and the second part I look at one sort of account, which is the Pangsha expedition, which was led by J.P. Mills, the then Deputy Commissioner of Naga Hills, and he was accompanied by Heimendorf, who was an anthropologist, Austrian anthropologist. So I look at those accounts, and I would like to focus on some few issues from those accounts. And this is a bit ambitious here, but I'm actually directly shifting to a very different text, which is written by a Naga in 1933. And this has been with me for more than, 7-8 years, and I thought this would be a right time to sort of use this in this context. And this was an English Angami dictionary written by Dr. Haralu in 1933, and so this was published in the Asiatic Society of Bengal, and it has a foreword by J.H. Hutton himself. So the study of colonial rule in the Naga Hills have concentrated on the events during the period concerned. There is a linear progression stitched into the narrative that portrays initial hesitation on the part of the colonial officials to venture into the frontier. The emphasis of this narratives normally focus on militaristic and administrative histories that culminate to colonial rule. Joy Pachwa contends that such accounts are rooted within the framework of geographical expansion, which ultimately locating the subjection of various tribes within fixed boundaries. She goes on to argue that such works do not usually inform us of the actual nature of colonial rule in Northeast India. So recent works on the Northeast by David Zhao on mapping the borderlands has shown how cartographic culture within the colonial official circle has created a geo-ethnic regional identity by objectifying physical spaces into fixed and closed spaces. While on the other hand, Lipok Marazavitsa, his work on labor and road construction in the 19th and early 20th century, he re-looked at how the colonial state devised and negotiated at the local level for its colonial projects. Pre-colonial Naga society, which was marked by fluidity and unclear boundaries, come to be defined in relation to colonial authority. The accounts of colonial reports and writings in the 19th century are replete with events of military expedition to the Naga hills. And here I'd like to discuss a bit about violence and maybe also problematize the violence, the narrative of violence in the context of the Nagas. Between the 1840s to 1855, 10 military expeditions were undertaken by the colonial state, primarily to punish the perpetrators of the raids committed by the Nagas in the plains of British territory. Violence became a tool, according to Thomas Simpson, and a mechanism to control, punish, and discipline. According to Simpson, the use of violence, including the destruction of villages and food stores, continued to be a key colonial strategy after the establishment of the Naga Hills district in 1966. He further contends that violence by the colonial state was reactive, a response to a prior violence, and educational, a language that the tribals understood. Later during the Pangsha expedition, J.P. Mills echoed the same thought, to punish the village as a way of instantiating authority in the frontier. So by the turn of the century, Hutton's instruction in Bodhisattva Ka's article, which was, I'm not sure if it's published, but it was presented in 2008. He presented a talk in JNU. And in this paper, he says that by the turn of the century, Hutton's instruction in 1910, that skulls found in the offending villages should be confiscated in the interest of scientific pursuits, marked a new trajectory among the colonial administrators and anthropologists. What we see here is that raids and headhunting went hand in hand and became a menace for the colonial officials in the administered area. Headhunting was officially banned in the administered area, but was continued to be practiced by the Nagas from the unadministered areas. In the letters, which was published by J.P. Mills' daughter about the Pangsha expedition, or on the Pangsha expedition, in that letter, one comes across a very sort of interesting element. J.P. Mills, as a colonial official, is portrayed as somebody who is very familiar and has a lot of friends among the Nagas, since before he became the deputy commissioner based in Kohima, he was the SDO in Mokokchung. J.P. Mills, who was when the Pangsha expedition took place in 1936, expedition was considered to have had in the process of that expedition, he was considered to have had many friends among the Nagas, the most prominent among whom was the chief of Chiang Mai. So writing in November 20th, 1936, from Chiang Mai, from his camp. So during the colonial period, the expedition team would normally camp nearby the village, and in the evening they would, if it's a friendly, so the villages, Naga villages in the unadministered area would be sort of categorized as friendly and hostile villages. So most of the time when they visited the villages, the colonial officials would be greeted well, but in one of the letters here, writing from Chiang Mai, Mills wrote, "We went gently down to the village and we were met by Chiang Mai, the chief on the way, a great personal and a friend of mine." These are the words of Mills himself. The other person who accompanied Mills in this particular expedition was Christopher von Heimendorf, so Heimendorf was granted permission by the government of Assam to join an expedition into the unmapped territory on the northwestern slopes of the Patkai Range. And the fascination of the Europeans here is interesting, because when Heimendorf in 1935, 1 year before the expedition took place, he was reading up on the terrains of the Naga Hills and the Konyaks and he was actually going through the Royal Geographical, on a table of the Royal Geographical Society, the maps that were, the places that were mapped, and throughout the narrative of the colonial and officials and the anthropologists, we tend to see a commonality which sort of shows that this, certain places like Pangsha, where when they reach that village and sort of when the punitive expedition took place and they burned down the village, they exclaim, we have reached a place where no white man has set foot on, and they were quite exuberant about how this village was going to be mapped, and the name was going to appear on a map. So that is one common theme that sort of comes up in the narratives of the colonial officials and anthropologists. So Haimendorf in The Naked Nagas mentions how a year before he carried out his anthropological work among the Konyak Nagas was looking on one of the large tables of the Royal Geographical Society in London, the maps of the region. His fascination and prospect of spending a year among what he termed as one of the less known Naga tribes of the hills of Assam led him to study the maps of northeastern corner of India. In his book, The Naked Nagas, Haimendorf narrates a very interesting part here, and I like to, of course, there are many instances, but I like to focus on, just because of the shortage of time, just one case here. And this has to do with reference to the Naga coolies. In his book, he narrates our Naga coolies. So this expedition, it consisted of around 350 coolies and around 200 or 250 riflemen. So these coolies, they were sometimes hired, or as Haimendorf here writes, our Naga coolies were no mere hired porters. They were all volunteers, and only a few had joined the expedition for the sake of their wages. Most of them hoped to participate in the fighting, which they were convinced we would meet, and so gain the right to dress and ornaments of a head hunter. So his accounts of the expedition was published in the Geographical Journal in March 1938, and in the paper he writes, I decided to take some of these hats back with me as anthropological specimens. But though we found a convenient basket in which to carry them, one of the Nagas in our company none of the Nagas in our company volunteered to carry the hats. Thus, I had the amusement of the Nagas and the surprise of the sepoys to take the basket on my own shoulder. These were the hats that were cut from the hanging hats that were cut from the tree outside the village of Pangsha. And in another statement, he says that this would be sent to the Pitt Rivers Museum. So this is one account here, and the other account here is of Dr. Haralu Angami English Dictionary. Just very quickly, I'd like to sort of just bring out some few points from the foreword and the introduction there's a biography of Haralu written by himself, and interestingly, Haralu Hutton mentions that in committing it to the press, I feel that some acknowledgements are due to those who helped me in the revision in addition to Mr. Tanquist. There were the Angami interpreters of the Deputy Commissioner's staff in Kohima, in particular Nihu and Elivusilia of Kohima, Nikrihu of Jotsoma, and the dialect used is primarily that of Kohima, though in many cases the Konma variant is given after it in bracket. Dr. Harulu's preface and autobiography I've retained in their original form. So what I wanted to bring out from this is the agency, the issue of agency when we're talking about history. I think most of the time the sources that we refer to shapes our narrative and the outcome of our research. But at the same time, I think it's also important to sort of relook at the way we read history. And I think, just to sum up very quickly, both Haimandov, he had an audience, and later on he presented his paper in the Royal Geographical Society. Haralu mentions that the audience in the context of Haralu was a local. Yet what we see here is that through colonial structures, the circuits through which certain writings were transmitted not just locally but to metropolitan cities and to societies, created that, we sort of noticed that a flow of writing at different levels. So the other question which I wanted to bring out was the question of violence. I think when we talk about violence, I think it's a two-way process. Violence is not just about the colonials sort of exercising their power over the Nagas, but I think there's something that's deeper than that, and that is the violence within the Nagas themselves, and that is evident through colonial writings during the colonial period. And I think if at all we talk about the nature of relationship between healing, decolonization, I think there's it's important for us to look at the agency, the question of agency, and also to recover that agency, which most of the time is shaped by history writing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bauna, Panmei. I have an announcement to make. Many of you have inquired about Dr. Vizier's book, Naga Odyssey, and I want to reassure you that more copies are coming tomorrow, so you can get your copy then. I now open the floor for questions, so if you have any questions, please forward your questions right now.